Good evening, everybody. I'm Karen Prosser, the Executive Director of Chagrin Arts, and we are so pleased that you're here with us this evening. It is my honor to serve as the official welcomer to this wonderful event this evening on behalf of Chagrin Arts and the Ohio Innocence Project and OIPU. So welcome to everyone who's here, and I want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for this event, Healing Justice, and the universities involved, OIPU chapters, and their advisors, John Carroll University, Sarah Schivoni, Tiffin University, Stephen Hurwitz, and Ohio University, Larry Heyman. And then we also have a representative from Ohio University who is the woman in charge of question and answers. So anyone who does have questions this evening, please, go to the chat room, type in your questions. And Kiera, who is down, I don't know if you see her on your screen, but I do on mine, is kind of monitoring all of this so that she can relay questions to Jennifer at the end of Jennifer's session. Sometimes, and I want to thank, Kathleen Wood, who is here monitoring all of the technology of this from OIP. I wanted to share with you my experience with Jennifer in that I met her several months ago in a project that Chagrin Arts is doing with Ohio Innocence Project, many Zooms, where we got together, Katie Monroe, the Executive Director of Healing Justice, and Pierce Reed and I met, and we planned a wonderful project that is currently on exhibit in our gallery at Chagrin Falls, 88 North Main Street, right down the street from the famous popcorn shop. And please come by, and if you can't come by, you can see it on our website. There's a virtual gallery, but it is photography that was taken of the Healing Justice session. In fact, Jennifer's picture is proudly displayed on her wall with a beautiful smile. But I have to tell you, I got to know this woman who I had never met before, and I just, when you meet people who just impress your head and your heart. And then I read the book, and I saw Jennifer's face in that square on my computer. I've been getting verklempt here because I saw her face every word I read. And I'm telling you, tonight you will all have that experience as you read for the first time or reread the book, because you will get to know this incredible woman. Jennifer is the founder of Healing Justice Project and one of the authors of Picking Cotton, which tells the story behind her experience as a survivor of a rape that led to a wrongful conviction, as well as the story of the man wrongfully convicted of that crime. Healing Justice is dedicated to assisting the victims of crimes in wrongful conviction cases, as well as the people who are wrongfully convicted. Healing Justice is also one of the loudest and strongest voices in criminal justice reform efforts. Tonight, I am extremely proud and honored on behalf of all of us tonight to introduce to you a person I now call my friend, Jennifer Thompson.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was really sweet. It really is really sweet. I hope everybody can hear me okay. So yeah, I mean, Picking Cotton, a lot of people like to ask me, how did we write the book and when did we decide to write the book? And I often have to start with this answer of, we had to live it first before you can write the story. And living it was, of course, tumultuous and life-changing for so many people. Picking Cotton is a memoir. It is written from my voice and Ronald Cotton's voice in first-person split narrative. And I hope that the book brings the reader through not just my life events, but Ronald's life events, and then as they kind of coincide and collide into each other's lives. It opens up in 1984 as a college student in a small town in rural Burlington, North Carolina at Elon College. I had kind of done the proverbial, mistakes of an 18 and 19-year-old. I'd started, kind of a false start at the first college. It didn't work really well. I ended up getting married very, very young at the age of 19. And I often say it was like a hot second kind of thing. And, a year and a half later, I found myself as a 21-year-old divorced girl and decided that I would go to Elon College. It was 5 minutes from my home in Winston-Salem. And I was doing really well. I was making a 4.0 GPA. I was slated to graduate summa cum laude and valedictorian of my class. I was dating a young dental student at the University of North Carolina, even though in the book it tells you he's a business student. We did change a few things around to protect certain folks. But, and my parents were quite surprised and I think shocked at not just the grades I was making, but I had kind of had this life change, right? I was working 2 jobs, I was paying my own bills, I was living alone, I was dating this med student, I was making these amazing grades, and by 22 years old, I had found myself on this path that I was quite proud of. On July of 28th of 1984, I went to go play tennis with my boyfriend. His parents were from Burlington, and our plans were to end up at a party that evening at a friend's house, which was pretty typical for a 22-year-old. But he had taken me out to dinner beforehand, and I have a habit of, and even at my age, I can still out-eat most large men. And it was the same back then. I would just eat these massive quantities of food for a small person. And by about 8 o'clock, I got very sick. I had a terrible headache. I asked my boyfriend to take me home, and he did. And he gave me some aspirin and some water. And my last memory that night was him standing above my bed, kind of rubbing my back to make sure I'd be okay before he left my apartment. But I didn't hear him leave. I didn't hear anything because I was fast asleep. I didn't hear the police who were canvassing my neighborhood looking for a man who had attempted to break in a neighbor's apartment across the parking lot around midnight. He had punched his hand through a glass door and was trying to unlock the door. And fortunately, she was still awake watching television and was able to call the police, and he ran. So I didn't hear anything at all until around 3 a.m. when I thought I heard someone moving in my bedroom. And as I struggled to open my eyes, I looked to the left side of my bed and saw the top of someone's head crouched. I could hear his feet sliding on the carpet. And when I asked, "Who is that?" thinking it has to be my boyfriend who had fallen asleep, a man jumped on the bed and straddled my body and put a knife to the left side of my throat and said, "Shut up or I'm going to kill you." And in those moments, anybody who's ever been a victim of violence, or if you've witnessed trauma like a car accident, your brain processes information in very rapid succession. It's like, I call it nanoseconds. Information is flooding your brain. You're trying to figure it out. You're trying to make sense of it. What is logical? And it's happening very quickly. And my first thought was, this is someone who had broken into my apartment. I'd startled him. He was robbing me, and I'll just give him my cards. And he told me he didn't want my money. And it was at that moment that I knew that I was going to be raped. It was very clear. All women that I've ever spoken to, rape survivors, will tell you that they know at that moment what's going to happen. But what's unclear to you, of course, is, will you die tonight? Will this be your last moment on this earth? Will this be the last face you look into? Will this be the last thing that touches your skin? And you start wondering how you're going to die. And you start thinking about, will it hurt? And will it be quick? Like, those are the things that go through your brain. You're really wondering what that's going to feel like as you're dying. And then I began to picture my father and my mother standing over my body in the hospital, having to identify me. And I could hear my father say, "Yes, that's our daughter, but that's not how she looked." And at that moment, something really strange happened in my head. And that is, I remember thinking to myself, if I'm going to die tonight, if I die, it won't be here on my back in this bed. There's got to be a way to survive. There has to be a way to figure out how to survive this. And so I made the decision at that moment to stay very, very calm, to stay very, very connected to my skin and to my body, to stay very present, because I knew that the only chance I had to survive was to look in the face of this man and to try to identify everything I could about who he was and look for a tattoo or a missing tooth or a piercing or a scar, and listen to his voice and try to pick up anything that I could remember later on so that I could help the police find this person. At one point, he tried to, I turned my head to the right side because I was going to throw up and I didn't want to die swallowing my own vomit. But that would actually save my life that night when he said, "Relax, I'm not going to hurt you." And I don't know why I did it, but I said, "I have a fear of knives. If you would just get off of me, just get off of me and take the knife to the front door and walk down the steps and drop the knife on the hood of my car, I'll let you come back in." And he looked at me really strange and he said, "Really?" And I knew at that moment that the power dynamics had just shifted just a little bit. And I said, I promise, because I needed to get him off of me. When he got off of me, I grabbed a blanket at the edge of my bed. I wrapped it around my body because I needed to stand close to him to figure out how tall he was, because I knew the police would ask me his height, his weight, you know, his hair, what was he wearing? They would ask me all those things, and it was really important that I remembered everything. And so I paid attention. I figured he was 11 or 6 feet tall and maybe 175, 100 pounds. He was light-skinned, African-American male. He had a pencil-thin mustache and very short, close-cropped hair. And he was wearing a dark blue shirt that went 3/4 of the way down his arm and had 3 white stripes across his bicep like a baseball jersey, and khaki fatigue pants. And then slip-on canvas type of boat shoes that were dark in color, like black or navy blue. But again, every piece of information I could glean that night was that much closer to me surviving. And he went to the front door and pretended to drop the knife out and came right back in and grabbed my arm. And I wasn't going to go back in the room. And I looked at him and said, I just need a moment to use the bathroom. Can I just have a minute? He told me to hurry up. As I went into the bathroom, I turned the light on for a second before he yelled at me to turn it off. But it was, again, it was another glance in light. I knew the police would ask me things like, how much light did you have? How close were you? How much time did you think you got to look at them? And I knew those were questions that to be asked of me. So when I went into the bathroom and I turned the light off, I started trying to figure out how I was going to get out, because my plan was to get through the bathroom window. And it was too small. I wasn't going to fit through the window. And then the drop down was to the cellar, and I would probably break my legs. But then I remembered he told me he'd come through my kitchen, and if I could get to the kitchen, maybe I could get out that door. So I walked out of the bathroom and I pulled the blanket again, and I said, could I just have some water first? And he told me, yeah, make me a drink and we're going to have a party. So I told him, okay, I'll make you a drink. And he went over to my stereo, which was in my den, and was trying to find 98.7 KISS FM. But as he turned on the stereo, a light came off of it, a blue light illuminated his profile as I walked by. And again, it was another piece of information for me to remember. So I quickly made my way to the kitchen and I turned the lights on, knowing that it would give time 15 feet, maybe 10 seconds, and I began to make noise with ice cubes and water and slamming cabinet doors. And I just opened up the back door and made sure that blanket was tight, and I took off running. By now it's about 3:30 and it's raining and the grass is slippery and I don't have any shoes on and I don't know where to go. But I knew that I had to get to light. Like that night, light was everything to me. I had to head to light. I thought I could go to my neighbor's and he would let me in, but he was gone for the weekend. And as I was banging on the door, I could see him coming out of my back door, and he was angry, and I knew I'd probably die. So I took off through the neighborhood and headed to a carport where the light was on. And I didn't know who lived there, but I prayed that they would be home. And I began to bang on the back door, screaming and yelling, "Please let me in. I've just been raped." And the husband and wife who lived there came to the door and looked at me and screamed. I fainted. They called 911. I could hear the sirens. They had canines that tried to pick his scent, but it had already been washed away because of the rain. And I would be taken to the hospital to have a rape kit done. I'd never even heard of a rape kit. I had no idea what that was, but my body was the crime scene, and all the evidence was on me, and it was in me, and it had to be collected and put in, bags and labeled as evidence, and it was humiliating. The doctor was clearly annoyed that he had to deal with another woman, another girl crying rape. And but it would be at the hospital where I would hear a woman down the hall crying this really awful, awful cry. And when I asked the detective, was she okay? What happened to her? They told me that she had just been raped. And I asked if it was the same man who raped me, and they said, yes, it was. So he had left my apartment in under an hour, and within less than a mile, he had crawled through her den window while she was sleeping and punched her and bit her and slapped her and put a flashlight in her eyes and a pillow over her face, and he assaulted her. And I remember laying there having this rape kit done, thinking about these two lives that he had just destroyed. I mean, like who we had been before that night was gone. Like we were dead. There was nothing that even remotely resembled me. I could look in the mirror and recognize my face, but everything that made me me, everything that made me special and unique was dead. And I had never hated like I hated this person. I wanted him off the streets. I wanted to help the police. He had to be removed from society. He was going to hurt other women, and I knew that. And so when the officers asked if I got a good look at him, I said I did. I know what he looks like. So I was taken to the police station to begin to give a detailed description of what had happened to me and who this person had looked like. And during that piece of the collecting the evidence, we found out that the hospital had not collected everything in the rape kit. So I had to be taken to a second hospital and have the whole thing done again. And so the trauma was just unbelievable. The loss, the sadness, the fear, the anger was palatable. I was able to help the police do a composite sketch that ran in the newspapers, and within hours of it hitting the newsstands, people were calling to the police station saying who this person looked like. But this one woman called and said, "You need to take a look at this guy named Ronald Cotton. He works near the apartment complex. I saw him that night on a bicycle wearing the exact same clothing, dark shoes, khaki fatigue pants, a blue shirt with 3 white stripes on the sleeves, white knit gloves, right outside of the apartment complex around 3 o'clock in the morning on July 29th. And so that was the person who had assaulted both of us. And I knew that. So 3 days after the rape, I was called to the police station to do a photographic lineup, and I was shown a 6-pack, 3-on-3. I was given instructions not to feel compelled, take your time, but come on, you're 22 years old, you've been called to the police station to look at 6 photographs. You know that one of these photographs is the person who did it, or they wouldn't have called you down here. And so it was my job to find him. The second woman had been beaten. She couldn't do it. She had a flashlight in her eyes. I had to do this for every single woman who had never gotten justice. And I found him. It was number 3, and I picked him out of the lineup. And they looked at me and said, that's who we thought it was. And the relief was just huge, right? I mean, I could breathe. I had gotten it right. And they were going to arrest this person. And it was just like, I could live again. Like I could breathe deeply again. A week after the photographic lineup, they called me back to the police station to do a physical lineup. And the only physical lineups I had ever seen were in movies and cop shows. You go into the room, there's that one-way glass. You see the guys, they can't see you, so that way you're safe. But the police station was being renovated. And the room that they would have used was undergoing, a renovation. So I was taken to an old abandoned schoolhouse to the second floor. And when I went into the room, there was just a picnic table and me and 7 men in a lineup, like right in front of me. And the fear was like literally unbelievable. I had to fight the urge to throw up. But I wanted to get this right. I wanted to make sure I got it right. And as I was looking at the lineup, I remember thinking that I think it's number 5, but his hair is more of an afro. Like I don't remember it being that much of an afro, but it was number 5. And I wrote it on a piece of paper and I gave it to the detectives. And again, they said, great job. That's who you picked out in the photograph. And once again, right, is that second layer of, whew, I got it right. I'm a good victim. I mean, I did this right. I did this right. And now we would get ready for trial, which would take place in January of 1985. It took 2 weeks of our life, listening to his family lying and over again about where he had been that night. Ronald had gotten his alibi confused, but how the hell do you get your alibi confused, right? Like, how do you not know where you were 3 days before? Like that, I couldn't understand that. And then for 2.5 days, I had to testify literally over and over again in every graphic detail about what he had done to me in front of my father. And then the defense attorney had the audacity to say to me, don't you know, as a female living alone, that when you go to bed in just your underwear, like you invite rape? Like, don't you know that? And so somehow I've been complicit in my own sexual assault and attempted murder. And I remember sitting there in the courtroom thinking, like, I hate every person in this courtroom. I hate all of you, all of you. Fortunately, the jury deliberated 45 minutes and came back with the only conclusion, and that is Ronald Cotton was found guilty of all charges and he would be sentenced to life and 54 years. And I would go back to the district attorney's office and we would have champagne and we would toast the criminal justice system because I'm the victim and it worked for me, and Ronald Cotton's going to die in prison somewhere way, way far away. He'll never hurt another person as long as he lives. And that is how justice works. And somehow I could put my life back together again. I could move on. I could move forward. But you can't move forward. And there's nothing to move on to because your life is over. It's over. And the only thing I knew to get through the days and the nights were copious amounts of cocaine and alcohol. Like if I could snort enough white powder up my nose and drink enough alcohol so I did not feel my skin for just a day, then it was somehow worth it. And so I lived like that for the next 4 months until I just about died. And I came out of a 36 long cocaine vodka induced stupor. And I remember thinking that if I continued like this, I would die. And if I died, he would win. And I'm not going to let that happen. And so I recovered and I graduated. I didn't graduate 4.0, summa cum laude, valedictorian to go on to get my master's degree in exercise physiology, but I graduated. And I didn't get to marry the perfect man who was going to be a dentist. he couldn't handle me because I cried a lot and I needed a lot of support, and it was just too much for him. And my friends didn't want to hang out with me because I was really sad, and my family didn't want to talk to me about the thing because it was super uncomfortable to talk about it. So don't talk about it. And so I graduated, I left North Carolina, I met a new man, I fell in love, I came back in 1986, and then in 1987, the Court of Appeals of North Carolina overturned the decision. They said the jury should have known there had been this second victim who had not been able to make an ID, and that maybe my memory had been wrong, and Ronald had been in prison, testing his innocence, and not only his innocence, but this guy who was in the same cell block as him, working in the same kitchen as him, was bragging about committing these crimes, who had been a rapist, and was bragging that he had done these crimes Ronald Cotton was in prison for. So in 1987, under voir dire, they removed the jury. They brought this mystery man in by the name of Bobby Poole, who of course denied having any involvement, having ever confessed. And the judge asked the second victim and myself if we recognized Mr. Poole. We both said absolutely not, never seen him before in our lives. Is the man in the courtroom today that raped you? And we said, yes, it's Ronald Cotton, and that was it. Ronald Cotton would be found guilty now of 2 first-degree rapes, and Ronald Cotton would be sentenced to 2 life sentences and 30 years. And again, you know, every time the courts do this, every time the courts render different decisions and verdicts and appeals, and your life is shattered again. And every time your life gets shattered, there's less pieces of you to pick up. There's less pieces of you that are recognizable from before. And it's a lot like thinking about a tornado, right? Like every time is a tornado, and every time your life is just shattered. And every time you're just trying to find a photo or a teacup or something that you can remember about who you used to be. And there's less of you every time. So in 1988, I got married. In 1989, I got pregnant. And in 1990, I gave birth to triplets, 2 little girls and a boy that were my reward of having survived so much. And I focused all my energy, everything went into these kids. They were my job, my task, my everything. And it gave me a reason to not die. It gave me a reason to get up. It gave me a reason to live. And I loved it. It was wonderful until 1995, when Mike Galden, who had been the original investigator, and the ADA of Alamance County came to my house, and they said, this was in March, they said, have you ever heard of this thing called post-conviction DNA testing? Like, I know what DNA is. I don't understand post-conviction. I don't understand that. Like, aren't we done? Like, it's been 11 years. Like, I can't keep doing this. And they said, well, Ronald still says he's innocent. We know he's not. But if the courts allow this DNA test thing to go through, your blood sample from your rape kit 11 years ago is disintegrated. And the courts could order you to give a new blood sample. And I replied, I can't do that. I've got 5-year-old triplets. So we're going to go to the doctor, and you're going to get my blood, and you're going to run that test, because we're done. Like, at some point there has to be finality. At some point we have to be done with this. And so we did. I went to the doctor. I had them draw my blood. They took it down the road. The state lab tested it. I didn't think about it till they showed back at my house in June. And they stood in my kitchen and they looked at me and they said, Jennifer, that DNA does not belong to Ronald. It's Bobby Poole's. And if I could have crawled into the center of the earth and died, I would have. It was literally the worst, one of the worst things that have ever happened to me. Because there's one thing to have survived a sexual assault. There's one thing to have survived, someone chasing you through the dark trying to kill you. There's a whole nother thing when you think about surviving a wrongful conviction. It shatters you in so many ways that I have yet to really explain, except I began to suffocate on fear, and I was paralyzed with grief. I was debilitated with guilt about what had happened. 11 years had gone by. We were both 22, we're both 33. I had graduated college, I had married, I had children, I had a home. And Ronald was walking out of prison after 11 years of doing time for another person's crime. And I didn't know what to do with all of that. There was no playbook, there was nobody out there talking about these things. This was the first DNA exoneration in the state of North Carolina. It was the first time a DNA test had been used in the country to not just exonerate someone, but to also implicate the actual guilty person. And so everybody wanted to find me. Everybody was trying to find the girl, and I was not interested in that. I didn't want the world to find me, so I stayed very, 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 very tiny. I got really, really, really tiny. And I thought that would work until it just didn't work. About a year later, a documentary filmmaker out of Boston found me and told me he was doing a documentary about the fallibility of eyewitness ID and would I tell my story. And I remember saying to him that I thought that was the worst idea I've ever heard. Like, why would you think that I'm interested in telling my story into a camera with millions of people watching, right? Like, that is a terrible idea. And he said, well, Ronald's going to tell his story. And then I realized that if he told his story, he was going to tell my story. And, only I can tell my story. Only I know what happened to me. And so I agreed, as long as Ronald and I did not meet each other, because I knew that Ronald was going to try to kill me. He was angry. He wanted to kill me. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted to hurt my children. And so we did this project called What Jennifer Saw. It aired in February of 1987 on PBS Frontline. The last thing I say in the film is I know that Ronald's innocent, but I still see him in my nightmares. And the last thing Ronald says is, I know she's sorry, but I really need to hear that from her. And it was that, right? It was me hearing myself. It was me hearing Ronald. And I thought, my God, if I'm ever going to remove this image in my brain, then I need to replace it with the right image. Like, I didn't know Ronald. I made him into something that he wasn't, and I needed to know the man. And that Ronald needed to hear how sorry I was from me. So in a small church, not far from where I had been raped 13 years before, I waited for this man and didn't have, I hadn't thought too far about what I was going to say. And before I could really get my head together, this man comes walking through the pastor's study and through the door, and I started to sob, and I told him if I spent the rest of my life telling him I'm sorry, would he ever be able to forgive me? And Ronald took my hands and he was like, I'm not angry at you. I don't hate you. I want us to both be happy. I want us to both live good lives. And, we both sat there and realized that what had happened to us was because of Bobby Poole. That we had this shared journey into being really, really traumatized and really, really hurt. And it wasn't just us that got hurt, it was our families that got hurt. And it wasn't just us and our families that got hurt, but it was the community of Burlington, because while Ronald was arrested, Bobby Poole committed 24 other violent crimes, 6 of which were first-degree rapes, before he was ever caught. So what we realized is that there was so much harm caused by this single person, right? This what I call the butterfly effect, this initial movement that creates this just awful tragedy. And everybody got hurt because of Bobby Poole. And it was from that place that Ronald and I began to heal together and become friends together and learn to love each other together and begin to be advocates of this, system reform that I've been working on for a very large part of my life. But becoming an advocate, what I didn't realize was I was actually reharming myself over and over again. Somehow the narrative had been given to me that what I was doing was because I had to do it, was because I owed it to the world, that somehow I had caused the wrongful conviction. And that was kind of like a scarlet letter that was given to me, and I wore it not understanding for many, many, many years that I had been harmed as well. And so as I kind of was out there doing the work that I was doing in the late 90s and all through, the early 2000s, what I was doing was allowing the public to blame me for the wrongful conviction. And it would really take until 2013 when I was asked to be on a panel in Charlotte, North Carolina at an Innocence Network conference. And Katie Monroe, who was a colleague of mine, had created the very first victims panel at an Innocence conference. And she wanted to talk to the victims of these cases. So there was 3 of us. It was 2 murder victim family members and myself. And all 3 of us thought, well, they're just going to ask us to tell our stories and we know how to do this. But what happened was, as we were standing up there, Katie asked the question, how had the wrongful conviction harmed us? And I got to tell you, I couldn't speak. Crying, because no one had asked me that. No one had bothered to ask me what had happened to me. And it was the first time I had permission to talk about everything. Years, how my life had changed and how it had harmed my children and how the world had blamed me. And I can't count the number of death threats people have sent me, threatening to find me and murder me and rape me and slit my throat. I can't tell you the things men have said to me about rape and sexual assault. And I thought I was supposed to bear that. And that day in Charlotte gave me permission to begin to acknowledge my own harm and what had happened to me. And that caused a shift. And what it did was remind me how important it is to expand the narrative about wrongful convictions. And that was where Healing Justice was born. Healing Justice was created as a way to expand the narrative that's more truthful and honest about what happens in a wrongful conviction. More often than not, when you hear about a wrongful conviction, it's a single voice, right? It's the guy, the woman who just got released, and everybody wants to know what they're going to eat first and what they're going to do first, and what are their plans. But beyond that singular voice, there's this huge swath of harm. There's the families, the parents, the siblings, the children that got left behind, the co-rememberers of memories, right, that they shared with this person, the parents who stopped celebrating Christmases and Thanksgiving because it's just too damn hard. And it's the victims who never got justice, who were given a false sense of justice. And it was not right. It wasn't true. And for murder victim family members, more often than not, the murder of their loved ones becomes a cold case again, and they'll never know who killed their child. They'll never know who killed their mother. They're never going to know who executed their brother and shot him in the head in his car. They're not going to know this. And so all of these voices get impacted by a wrongful conviction. But we're talking about it in these little tiny voices, right? And so Healing Justice was this way of trying to be more authentic and truthful about the stories of wrongful convictions. So I launched Healing Justice in 2015. We're 5 years old. The first thing I did, which was one of the smartest things I've ever done, was to hire Katie Monroe as my executive director. Her mother was wrongfully convicted of first-degree murder. After Katie had finished law school, Katie spent the next 11 years to free her mother. And so knowing that to bring direct experiences into the work was really, really important. It's hard to do this aftermath work, which is what we do, this aftercare, if you've not been harmed by it, because you don't really know what people need until you've been a part of that, until you've been failed. So we started Healing Justice 5 years ago. We're doing incredible work, I think. We don't just work with those that are directly impacted by the wrongful conviction, but we also work with the criminal justice system as a whole. So we work with prosecutors, we work with judges, we work with police, we work with defense attorneys, we work with victim advocates. Anybody who might come in contact with the people that we serve, we want to work with, do trainings, do technical assistance, listening sessions, trying to learn as much as we can so that we can continue to help those of us that have been harmed in that aftercare space. So how do we heal from the harm is really what we do. And we take an all harmed approach using restorative justice principles. And that was a lot I just said, but I hope that was helpful, and that whoever's listening out there, I wish I could see all the 48 faces, but whoever's listening, I hope that that was helpful.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciated hearing that. Thank you for sharing with everybody. I really, really appreciated it, hearing your story. So now I believe we're going to start with questions, if you're all done with everything. So people can send their questions into the chat, and then I can just start reading them as people start to send them in. A question that I had was about the book, of being about wrongful conviction. I also recognize that you're a victim of a horrible crime like Mr. Cotton and a victim of the criminal justice system. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that experience. Can you tell us how you're doing today, and what you're doing today, just overall, how you're doing?
No, I mean, I think I'm doing well. I mean, it's funny when people read the book, a lot of people think that like my story and my life kind of ended in 2000 and whatever time period. Like everybody thinks the triplets are still 9 years old, but they're 30. So I've got 30-year-old triplets now. I've got 5 grandchildren. Life is busy. Healing Justice keeps me extremely busy, but that's what I want to do, and that's where my love is. So I think I'm doing really well. When you're a victim of trauma and violence, I have been, that stays a part of your life forever. But I've learned to live kind of around the trauma and be really mindful of when I can feel a trigger, when I know that something's kind of coming up. I know how to take care of myself, do self-care, mindfulness, that kind of thing, so I can kind of thwart whatever's getting ready to happen. So I think I've gotten pretty good at that.
Yeah. Another question that I had was, why is it, do you think, that so many prosecutors and members of the public don't understand that like survivors of the crime are not served by wrongful conviction, that they're also harmed in the process? They're often forgotten. I know that you touched on that a lot. Why is it that prosecutors fail to admit their mistakes? And is that something that you ran into a lot with your experience?
Well, I mean, I think the answer to prosecutors failing to admit their mistakes, all of that is kind of designed into our criminal justice system, right? I mean, our criminal justice system is adversarial. It is predicated on you lose, I win, right? Or you win and I lose. I mean, that's the way it is. And so I think what happens is we get away from the actual serving of justice, serving crime survivors, and being fair and being honest and transparent, I think we get away from that, and it really has become a win at all costs. And when we use those kind of frameworks of winning at all costs, it's very difficult for 20, 30 years later for somebody to come back and say, yeah, I probably should have given that information over. I probably should have let the defense know, but I didn't. They're not going to do that. And because they have full immunity, there's no reason for them to. I mean, our system is not designed for truthfulness and transparency. It's really not. It's the way that the system was designed many, many, many years ago. Our criminal justice system was never created to serve people of color, people that are poor, mentally ill people, and for a lot of the years, for most of the years, it wasn't designed to serve women. Our criminal justice system was designed to serve white, wealthy, land-owning Christian males. And if you didn't fit into that category, the system was not going to serve you. And we've not really moved very far from that.
I completely agree. Thank you so much. How can people learn more about what you do with Healing Justice and the work that you and Katie do to help other people that have been wrongfully convicted or wrongfully that have just been involved in the criminal justice system?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to, of course, we've got a great website, www.healingjusticeproject.org. You can follow us on, social medias. We have Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And, I always ask people to please follow us. We don't just post some interesting things and articles about wrongful convictions, but, we post artwork from the stuff that's at Chagrin Arts. We post artwork. We post upcoming events that we're doing. And if people will really follow us, I really do think in the next couple of months, people are going to be like totally shocked by this new information and cool event that we're going to tell people soon, but not now, not tonight. So that means you have to follow us.
Can you tell us more about the art that's made and how it kind of helps people heal with the processes that they're dealing with?
Yeah, so we've done 14 healing retreats so far. Our last one was in March, right before COVID. We bring together somewhere between 16 and 20 folks that have been impacted by a wrongful conviction. And we do two different kind of events. We have healing retreats that are kind of what's called peer support. So bringing together crime survivors, bringing together exonerees. And then we also do retreats, which is more restorative justice in nature, which we bring together exonerees and victims and family members so they can hear each other's experiences, which is extremely healing, as you can imagine. To hear, if you're a person who's exonerated from a case, and to listen to the harm from a rape survivor over here, to hear each other's experiences is invaluable, and it's healing beyond words that I can actually articulate tonight. We bring them together on a Thursday. They stay with us until Sunday. We pay for their transportation, we pay for their meals, and then we have different activities we do throughout those 3 days. But one of the activities we do, which is I think one of the most important activities, is expressive arts. And so if you come to a retreat, the first time you come, you create a mask, and you'll see some of the artwork at Chagrin Arts, but the masks were created as a way to showcase visually what is the mask that you wear. And we all wear a mask, right? What is the mask you wear? And on the inside of your mask? And what is the real you? What is the mask you put on every day to protect yourself from the world, or to protect? And they create these beautiful masks with colors and materials and words. And they'll create this over a couple of days. They share them on Sunday. So that's when we share our art. If you come a second time, which people are always welcome to come back, they do a project called If You Could Walk in My Shoes. So I collect shoes, and you'll find a pair of shoes that resonates with you, and you'll create what was the journey you walked in. Like if a legislator, if a policymaker a prosecutor was looking at your shoes and you paint them and you design them, what do you need them to know? If they looked at your shoes, what would they know? And they'll often create the road they walked on as well. And those are really quite remarkable. A third participant will create what's called story stones. It's Native American in nature. So, and we love rocks at Healing Justice. So thinking about rocks as chapters of your life, and you'll paint them and you'll design them to show us what the chapters are. And some of them can be very simple. Some people might do just a color, but other people will do words and materials over them to create their story in rocks. And a fourth time person will create what's called a lost and found heart box. So taking an empty heart box, they'll showcase what did their heart lose, but what did their heart find. And so I try to take people through different art projects as they come through Healing Justice, and they go from masking to really also understanding that there were things they found along the way. It might be new friends. It could be being able to do art. It could be, I found hope. I found that I'm stronger than I ever thought I was. So those are the art projects that they do. And a lot of the folks will tell me that it's not just being able to do the art and talk about it in circle, but to bring it home and put it like on a table, and family and friends will come over and they'll say, wow, what is that? And they can say, that's my, what do you mean by that? And it's a way of them also helping to explain their journey to family and friends that sometimes find it hard to ask those questions, like, tell me about what happened to you. Tell me about your pain. Tell me about your loss. So their art is a way of also being able to take it home and tell people about their journey.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. We have a question from Karen, who asked what your current relationship is with Mr. Cotton today.
So Ron and I live about 45 minutes away. He is a grandfather as well. He's got 2 children. COVID, of course, makes everything more difficult. So I don't see him like I used to see him. His health has been difficult over the last few years. He had a massive stroke in 2011 and has had a couple since then, smaller strokes. He's got diabetes and some high blood pressure, but yeah, I mean, Ronald and I will always be a part of each other's lives forever. You can't go through what Ron and I went through, and I mean, I guess you could, but we can't. I mean, we've had a shared journey that, for a lot of people, our relationship is just really unique.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm just going to ask a couple more questions. So one that we got is from Nora. She said, how does Healing Justice work within the issues of systemic racism within our justice system? So how does it work with issues of systemic racism?
Well, I mean, one of the things in Healing Justice is our participants are our participants, right? So we kind of have a half and half, to be honest with you. But we are getting ready to do a racial justice town meeting soon. I think the way Healing Justice works within the racial justice community is acknowledging it, right? I mean, I think that's the first thing for anything, is you have to acknowledge it exists, and then provide safe spaces for people to unpack that. So for us, what we do is really provide spaces for people to kind of A, unpack and unfold, and B, to provide spaces for people to kind of lean in and witness and hear it. And I think that's part of the unique work that we do. We can never solve any problem. I don't care if it's sexual violence or LGBTQ, issues. We can never solve it until we're willing to sit in a space and listen first, right? And you have to listen to the people that have been directly impacted by it. Like, you can't listen to a bunch of talking heads. So being able to provide opportunities for people to talk about it, I think is one of the things we're particularly good at. We did several, I'm not sure, I think it was like 24 virtual circles since COVID. And so that's one of the things that we've been able to do with our participants is providing kind of virtual circle spaces for people as they've been triggered, particularly during, George Floyd and the Breonna Taylor. I mean, many of our Healing Justice family were very triggered. And so providing those spaces, not just for them to be able to talk, but for people that look like me to be able to listen.
Thank you so much. I think this is going to be the last question. We're running out of time, but
You're welcome.
Nora also said thank you. Yes. What is the most important thing that you want people to take away from hearing you tonight?
I think the most important thing I want people to take away from, I mean, that's really difficult, by the way, to say the most, but I think as far as healing justice, the most important thing would be blaming. We need to stop victim blaming in lots of different, areas and arenas, but in wrongful convictions, and I've said this a million times, for whatever reason, when we're talking about wrongful convictions, nobody talks about the actual perpetrator. Nobody does. And so if we really want to start talking about wrongful convictions and where we need to place blame, we need to start talking about the person who caused all of the harm to begin with. And we need to stop blaming rape survivors who are brutalized, tortured, beaten, left for dead, and asking them to participate in a photographic or physical lineup after their eyes have been bloodied. And more often than not, the lineups are flawed to begin with. And we're asking traumatized people to participate in flawed police procedures. We are invariably going to fail. And then 20 years later, we're going to blame them. Like, that's just wholly wrong. And so I really hope that when people leave here tonight, and tomorrow when you open up the newspaper, you get onto Instagram or you're on Facebook and you read about the newest exoneration, I want everybody to remember that there is someone who was so hurt. There's a family member who lost somebody who's murdered, a person who's been raped. And when we think about those stories, I want people to realize that there was a perpetrator who started it and then everybody else got hurt. And we don't actually have to create an either or narrative, right? That I can only care about the exoneree or I can only care about the victim. Like, we don't have to do that. But I want everything we do to be and we can create spaces of equity and empathy and compassion for everybody who got hurt, everybody. And I guess that's my big takeaway is let's stop the victim blaming. Let's put the blame where it belongs, which is at the foot of the perpetrator, and everybody else, let's create a space where everybody's invited to talk about what happened, and we can validate and witness everyone's harm. We can create a narrative of equity. And I really do believe if we can do that, we can get so much more criminal justice reform done, so much more, when all voices are invited to the table.
Thank you so much. You've really given me a very important point of view, especially with the victim blaming. I think that a lot of times I've never heard about how the victim is impacted when someone's exonerated. And I couldn't imagine like that defeating feeling of like, I thought I was okay and I thought that everything was okay and now it's not anymore. So thank you for like sharing that with everybody, because I'm sure that's not something that other people think about either. And also just thank you for sharing your experience tonight with everybody and taking time to talk to us about your opinion and your experiences and how that's helped and shaped your views. Thank you so much.
Well, you're most welcome. Make sure you follow Healing Justice. So
Yes, I subscribe to the website actually. Yes, with my email.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody who joined me tonight. I don't know who you are. I wish I could see your lovely faces, but
Thank you.
you're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Nice to meet you, Karen.
Nice to meet you. Care.